The front-end design skill isn't relevant here. This is a pure creative writing task. Let me write this directly. The water drained to nothing by dawn. By noon, Karen was standing at the edge of the empty pool with two uniformed officers behind her, pointing at the cracked concrete like it was a crime scene. And the worst part was, she had made it one. The afternoon Corvin Marsh decided to drain his pool was the most ordinary Tuesday he'd had in years. The sky was flat white, the kind that made distances hard to judge, and the neighborhood of Sable Pines sat quiet under it the way neighborhoods do when everyone is home, but no one wants to admit it. Corvin had lived on Whitmore Court for 11 years. He knew every driveway, every fence line, every dog that barked at 6 a.m. He knew which sprinkler systems ran too long and which gutters hadn't been cleaned since 2019. He knew his neighbors the way you know people you've never truly chosen. By proximity, by repetition, by the slow accumulation of small irritations and occasional kindnesses that never quite cancel each other out. He knew Deborah Falk, who waved from her mailbox every morning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting all night for the chance. He knew old Gerald Petit next door, who grew tomatoes in raised beds and left them on porches without knocking because he said knocking was for salespeople. And he knew Renata Hollis. Renata Hollis lived directly across the street in the house with the cream shutters and the wind chimes that never stopped. She had moved in 3 years ago after her divorce, and within 6 months, the entire neighborhood had quietly reorganized itself around the question of how to manage her. She wasn't loud exactly. She wasn't the type to play music at midnight or let her grass grow wild. Her damage was more precise than that. She sent emails to the HOA about paint colors that didn't technically violate the guidelines, but that she personally found displeasing. She photographed vehicles she believed were parked too close to corners. She had once submitted a formal complaint about Gerald's tomato steaks because she claimed they were visible from the street at an angle she found structurally concerning. The HOA, a largely toothless body that met quarterly in the back room of a credit union, had dismissed every single one of her complaints, which had only sharpened her focus. She had started calling herself the neighborhood's accountability liaison, a title she had invented entirely on her own and that no one had ever once used in her presence. Corvin had kept his distance from her with the disciplined care of a man who understood that certain kinds of conflict, once started, do not end. He nodded from driveways. He returned her wave when she waved. He had never once given her a reason to turn that precision in his direction. Then he drained his pool. It wasn't a dramatic decision. The pool was 15 years old and had been showing its age for 2 seasons. The plaster was cracking along the deep-end wall in a way that his pool service company had told him would only get worse, and the cost of replastering was significant enough that Corvin had spent the better part of March researching whether it made more financial sense to drain it completely, tear out the plaster, and start fresh before summer, or patch it through one more year and hope for the best. He was not a man who hoped for the best with things that could be measured. He called 3 different contractors, got 3 different quotes, and by the second week of April had made the decision. Drain it, replaster it, have it ready by the end of May. He called the county water office to ask about drain permits and was told that no permit was required for residential pool drainage as long as the water was directed to the sewer cleanout and not into the street or adjacent property. He confirmed this in writing by email. He called his pool service company and scheduled the drainage pump for a Tuesday. He was thorough in the way that people who have been through enough disputes learn to be thorough, not out of paranoia, but out of a hard-earned understanding that documentation is the only armor that holds. The pump truck came at 8 in the morning. 2 workers in gray shirts connected the hose to the main drain fitting and ran the discharge line to the cleanout access near the side of the house. Corvin stood in the backyard drinking coffee and watching the water level drop by the steady, almost meditative inch. There was something unexpectedly melancholy about it, he thought. The way the pool that had held 11 summers of his life was slowly revealing its bones. The waterline tiles, always just beneath the surface, now exposed in a pale blue band around the perimeter. The depth markers on the walls. The old pool light housing cracked and faded at the bottom of the deep end. By 11:30, the pool was empty. By noon, the contractor had arrived to assess the plaster condition. Corvin was standing at the shallow end discussing the crack pattern when he heard his side gate open. He turned. Renata Hollis was walking into his backyard. She was dressed in a white linen blouse and khaki pants, her hair pulled back with the tight precision of someone who had somewhere important to be, and she was holding her phone out in front of her at an angle that suggested she was either filming or about to film. Behind her, 2 steps back, was her neighbor from 2 doors down, a woman named Patrice Greer, who had never once in Corvin's memory initiated any conflict of her own, but had a talent for standing near the conflicts of others with an expression of intense moral concern. Corvin set his coffee cup down on the pool, coping with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing not to react too quickly. "Renata," he said, "this is my backyard." "I'm aware," she said, still moving forward, still holding the phone at that angle. "I'm documenting." "You're trespassing." She stopped, not because of what he said, but because she had reached the position she wanted, standing at the edge of the empty pool, looking down into it with an expression that managed to combine concern, satisfaction, and accusation into something that had no name but that everyone in Sable Pines would have recognized immediately. "This pool," she said, "is a hazard." Corvin looked at his contractor, a heavyset man named Sal, who had been in the business for 22 years and who wore the expression of someone who had seen this particular type of situation before and wanted no part of it. Sal made a small, nearly invisible gesture with his head that communicated, with startling economy, that whatever was about to happen was Corvin's problem. "The pool is under renovation," Corvin said, "which is entirely within my rights on my own property." "An uncovered excavation," Renata said, gesturing at the empty pool as if its shape alone constituted an argument, "within proximity to the street, within view of neighborhood children, represents a category of hazard that the county code specifically—" "It's not an excavation," Corvin said. "It's an existing pool that has been drained. Those are different things. Legally different. I've read the county ordinance." "Then you know I'm correct." She lowered the phone slightly. Something shifted in her face. Not retreat exactly, but recalibration. "I'm going to contact the county building department," she said, "and the HOA." "That's your right," Corvin said. "This conversation is over. Please leave my property." Patrice, who had not spoken a word, turned and walked back through the gate. Renata followed a moment later, still filming over her shoulder as she went. Sal waited until the gate clicked shut. Then he said, "She do this a lot?" "Enough," Corvin said. "You want I should put up a fence around it while we work?" Corvin looked at the empty pool. It sat in the afternoon light like a wound in the earth, pale and open and completely harmless. "I'll put up safety netting," he said. "Not because she's right, because I'd do it anyway." Sal nodded. "Smart." That evening, Corvin received an email from the Sable Pines HOA, specifically from Renata Hollis, in her self-appointed capacity as accountability liaison, forwarded to the HOA board with a subject line that read, "Urgent. Safety violation. 14 Whitmore Court." The body of the email contained 3 photographs of his empty pool taken from angles that required her to have been standing at the edge of his property line or beyond it, a 12-paragraph assessment of the supposed hazard, citations from 2 county ordinances that did not apply to residential pools, and a demand that the board compel him to either refill the pool immediately or install a commercial-grade barrier system within 48 hours. Corvin read it twice. He forwarded it to his attorney, a woman named Celeste Okafor, who had handled his divorce 6 years ago and who had since become something closer to a general counsel for the minor complexities of his life. He wrote, "Any response needed here?" She wrote back within 20 minutes. "No, they have no authority over your pool renovation. If she continues to enter your property, we talk about a restraining order. Document everything." He documented everything. He had been doing it since the pump truck arrived, out of the same instinct that had made him confirm the drainage permit question in writing. He printed the county ordinance. He saved the contractor's schedule and invoice. He photographed the safety netting he installed around the pool perimeter the following morning. Bright orange construction netting on stakes, professionally installed, more than adequate for any reasonable interpretation of safety standards. He kept every email. On Thursday, 2 days after the drainage, he came home from work to find a note tucked under his windshield wiper. It was handwritten on cream stationery in a careful, looping cursive that he recognized without needing the signature. It read, "The matter of the pool has been reported to the County Code Enforcement Division and the non-emergency police line. I hope you understand this is not personal. I am simply protecting the community we all share. R. Hollis." He photographed the note. He went inside. He made dinner, pan-seared chicken, roasted sweet potato, a green salad, and ate it at his kitchen table with the news on low in the background, because he had learned, through 11 years of living alone in this house, and 6 of those years as a genuinely divorced man rather than a married one pretending otherwise, that the body needs routine when the mind is running hot. He washed the dishes. He sat on his back porch with a glass of water and looked at the empty pool in the dark, at the orange netting glowing faintly in the motion sensor light. He was not afraid of Renata Hollis. He was something more uncomfortable than afraid. He was tired of her, in the deep way that tiredness accumulates when the thing exhausting you has no respect for your boundaries, no regard for evidence, and no apparent capacity for shame. On Friday morning, a code enforcement officer named Daniel Yi arrived at his door. He was young, professional, and clearly not enjoying his morning. He introduced himself, explained that a complaint had been filed regarding an uncovered residential excavation, and asked if he could see the property. Corvin said yes. He walked Daniel Yi to the backyard, showed him the pool, showed him the safety netting, showed him the contractor's documentation, showed him the printout of the county ordinance confirming that no permit was required for residential pool drainage, and showed him the email confirmation from the county water office. Daniel Yi looked at the pool for approximately 30 seconds. He looked at the netting. He wrote something in a small notebook. Then he said, "There's no violation here. The complaint is unfounded. You'll receive a written notice of closure within 10 business days." "Is the complainant notified of the closure?" Corvin asked. "Yes." "Can I be present when that notification is issued?" Daniel Yi looked at him with the measured patience of a man accustomed to neighborhood disputes. "I'm not able to involve you in the notification process," he said, "but the closure is public record. You can request a copy." Corvin thanked him and walked him back to the front door. As Daniel Yi's county vehicle pulled out of the driveway, Corvin looked across the street. Renata Hollis was standing at her front window. She was not pretending to do something else. She was simply watching, with the patient, focused intensity of someone who believed that watching was itself a form of action. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he went back inside. The replastering began the following Monday. Sal's crew arrived at 7:30 with a concrete truck and the particular organized chaos of professionals who do difficult physical work and do it well. Corvin had taken the morning off to be present, partly because he wanted to see the work, and partly because he had begun to understand that his presence on his own property, visible and calm and completely without apology, was itself a statement that needed to be made. By 10 o'clock, the pool was a hive of activity: grinding, mixing, troweling. The noise was significant, but within the county's allowable hours, a fact Corvin had confirmed and documented. By 11, Patrice Greer had appeared on the sidewalk in front of the house and was looking over the fence with an expression of deep moral calculation. At 11:43, a police cruiser pulled up in front of 14 Whitmore Court. 2 officers got out. Behind them, emerging from a silver sedan that Corvin recognized as Renata Hollis's, was Renata Hollis. She was holding her phone again, filming. She was also holding what appeared to be a printed document, which she was already extending toward the officers as they reached the sidewalk. Corvin walked out his front door. He had his phone in his hand. He was filming too. One officer, tall, in her mid-30s, with the composed expression of someone who had learned to approach every civilian interaction as a potential administrative event, introduced herself as Officer Tran. The other was younger, standing slightly to the rear. Renata was already speaking, her voice carrying the bright, urgent energy of a woman who had been waiting for this moment and had rehearsed it. "This individual," she was saying, gesturing at Corvin with the printed document, "has created an ongoing public safety hazard on his residential property, has ignored formal notice, has refused to comply with county code, and has been conducting unpermitted construction work that began before 7 a.m. in violation of local noise ordinances." Officer Tran looked at Corvin. "Sir, are you the property owner?" "Yes," Corvin said. "Corvin Marsh. This is my home." He handed her the folder he had brought from the house. The folder he had prepared and placed on his kitchen counter that morning, as if he had known this was coming, which he had, because he had been paying attention. Inside the folder, the county ordinance, the email confirmation from the water office, the code enforcement closure notice he had received 2 days earlier, the contractor's license and schedule, and the city noise ordinance confirming that construction work was permitted from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays. Officer Tran took the folder. She opened it. She began to read. Renata Hollis continued speaking. She spoke about community standards and fiduciary responsibility and the rights of adjacent property owners and the specific subsection of county code that she believed applied, which she had highlighted in yellow on the printed document she was still holding out. Officer Tran did not look up from the folder. The younger officer, whose nameplate read DeLuca, was watching Corvin's contractor crew with an expression that had shifted over the past 90 seconds, from professional alertness to something closer to second-hand embarrassment. Officer Tran closed the folder. She looked at Renata Hollis. "Ma'am," she said, "code enforcement has already investigated this property and issued a closure of complaint. There is no violation." Renata's voice did not drop. That closure was premature. I have submitted a formal appeal. Ma'am. Officer Tran's voice was not loud, but it had a quality that stopped movement. The appeal process is an administrative matter. It doesn't create grounds for police response. We can't compel a property owner to halt legal renovation activity on the basis of a pending appeal. He started construction before 7 a.m., Renata said. I have the timestamp on my recording. Corvin looked at Officer DeLuca. My crew arrived at 7:32, he said. I have the gate camera footage with timestamp. DeLuca looked at him. He looked at Renata. He looked at Officer Tran. He said nothing. Renata turned to Corvin with the full weight of her attention, the way she had turned that attention on him over the pool 3 days ago, and said loudly enough for the officers to hear, You think you can do whatever you want on this street. You have never once considered the impact your choices have on the people around you. Corvin looked at her for a long moment. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away. I drained my pool, he said. That's all I did. Officer Tran handed him back the folder. Mr. Marsh, you're free to continue your renovation. Everything appears to be in order. She turned to Renata. Ma'am, I'd encourage you to work through the administrative process if you believe there's an issue. Calling police dispatch for a matter that's already been resolved by code enforcement is not an appropriate use of emergency resources. Renata Hollis looked at both officers. She looked at the folder in Corvin's hand. She looked at her phone, still filming. Something in her face was performing certainty that the rest of her was no longer fully committed to. I'm filing a formal complaint with the police department, she said. That's your right, Officer Tran said. They got back in the cruiser. They drove away. Corvin stood on his front walk. Renata stood on the sidewalk. The crew worked in the backyard, the steady sound of troweling and concrete mixing carrying over the fence line. This isn't over, Renata said. No, Corvin agreed. It isn't. He went back inside. He copied the gate camera footage to a cloud drive. He wrote a detailed account of the morning's events with times and names. He sent it to Celeste Okafor with a subject line that said, I think we need to have that conversation now. Celeste called him back within the hour. She asked 3 questions. Then she said, Okay, here's what we're going to do. The email she sent on his behalf arrived in Renata Hollis's inbox at 4:17 that afternoon. It was 2 pages long, single-spaced, and written in the precise, airless language of legal correspondence. It documented every instance of Renata's intrusion onto Corvin's property, every unfounded complaint, every police call, every email, every note left on his vehicle. It cited the relevant statutes on harassment, nuisance complaints made in bad faith, and unlawful entry. It stated that any further intrusions onto the property, any further complaints made to governmental bodies without factual basis, and any further contact of any kind not initiated by Corvin himself would result in immediate civil action. It did not threaten. It informed. That was worse. Across the street, in the house with the cream shutters and the wind chimes that never stopped, Renata Hollis read the email. She read it again. She set down her phone. She looked out her front window at 14 Whitmore Court, where the contractor's truck was parked, and the work continued with steady, indifferent progress. For the first time in 3 years, she did not reach for her phone to document something. She sat with that stillness for a long time. It had a weight to it that she had not anticipated, the weight of something running out. Not patience, not energy, but something she could not name clearly and did not want to examine directly. She told herself she was strategizing. She was simply regrouping. She was deciding her next move with care, because that was who she was. She was the person who cared. She was the person who paid attention when no one else did. She was the accountability liaison. But the email sat open on her screen, and the words did not soften, and the empty pool next door was filling with fresh plaster that had nothing to do with her, and all of her certainty was still present, still insisting on itself, but for the first time, it was doing so in a room that felt smaller than it had before. That was the first irreversible thing. Not a confrontation, not a consequence, just a door closing quietly inside her that she had not known was open. The new plaster cured over the following 10 days. The crew came back on a Wednesday morning to begin the tile work, a classic white with a narrow blue border that Corvin had selected from a catalog on a Sunday afternoon in February, before any of this had happened, when the most significant thing on his mind had been pool aesthetics. The tile setters were methodical and quiet and completely absorbed in their work. Corvin left them to it and drove to his office, where he spent the day managing the ordinary complications of the landscape architecture firm he ran with a partner named Theodora Vance, who had been hearing the Renata Hollis situation in installments since the drainage day, and who had developed opinions about it that she kept to herself except when she couldn't. She called the cops, Theodora said that morning, not for the first time. Over a pool renovation. You know why? Corvin said. Because she's unwell. Because she needed to win something, Corvin said. And winning, for her, means getting a reaction. Theodora looked at him over her coffee. And you're not going to give her one. I already gave her a letter from an attorney, he said. That's not a reaction. That's a boundary. There's a difference? One comes from emotion, he said. The other comes from documentation. She laughed despite herself. You are a deeply exhausting person to be friends with. Yes, he agreed. But I'm right. He was right. He had learned to be right the long way, through the years of his marriage that had taught him that rightness without documentation was just a story you told yourself, and through the years after, when he had rebuilt his life with the particular care of someone who understood that the structures you build after a collapse have to be sturdier than the ones that fell. He had learned to keep records. He had learned to let attorneys speak when the moment required it. He had learned that the most powerful thing you could say to a person determined to destabilize you was,